And we are live on the YouTubes. Welcome to the PFG Live for Sunday, January 8th. Kevin, welcome aboard. Happy New Year. Almost Machining, welcome aboard. And appreciate any video and audio checks from you guys. Brian, welcome aboard. Nice to see y'all. We have some surprises for you today. Well, it's been a week. It's good to see you guys. We missed... thank you, Kevin. Kevin says we sound and look good. We missed 1 week because of Christmas, another week because of New Year's. Thank you, almost. And then last week I was down for the count. And like you have to say these days, it wasn't COVID. So I had this miserable head cold that kept me down. But I discovered a combination. Henry, welcome aboard. Oh, thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. Yeah, while I was recovering, I had time to work on the tech here, and we got stuff really sorted, and I'll share that with you in a few minutes. But the combination of guai hot sauce, and chicken soup, absolutely unbeatable. And you can combine the hot sauce and the chicken soup into hot and sour soup from your favorite Chinese restaurant, and that is totally legal. So let's see, looking at our control panel, everything's looking great. So we'll give it a few minutes for the late check-ins, and then we'll get underway here. Today, amongst other things, I'm going to be giving you a report on my coolant temperature control experiment. Much was learned, and I will share all that with you. And in addition to the technology we're using for streaming. Henry got sick after his last workday before Christmas. Of course, right? That's when it has to happen. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better. I hope you're back to 100%. I'm claiming 90% right now. But I hope you guys came back. Hey, K-Bonk is here. Sunday Fun Day. Welcome aboard, sir. I have to say, here in New Hampshire, it is severe clear, about 30 degrees, and gorgeous. So I'm really happy about the weather. And we'll get weather reports from you guys, I'm sure, as you check in. So let's see, where are we? 103. At 105, we'll get onto the agenda here. I saw some nice posts from folks this week. Rain in Oregon, according to Kevin. Let's see. I don't know if I have this set up properly. Oh, there you go. It's not bad. There's your chat window. Let's see. I saw some nice posts from, Aaron Walla. Do you guys know who Aaron Walla is? He posted an interesting project that he was working on the grinder, and hopefully he'll check in today. I don't know if he will, but we'll see. Hey, Tuck. Welcome aboard, sir. Hey, what's going on in Buffalo? Is it like 600 feet of snow? K-Bonk is reporting 42 and sunny in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That is awesome. I'm waiting for the Tuck report, though. I need to know what's going on in Buffalo. Hey, Chris. Welcome aboard. So just in case you guys are curious, there's a measured 25-second lag time between what I'm sending out and what you're seeing. So if it takes me a minute to get back to you, that's why. And it turns out on YouTube, you get to choose low latency versus high quality. So if I choose low latency, that number will shrink, but the quality will be reduced. So we're not doing that. We need quality. So let me get into some of the tech I've learned this week about the streaming hardware. The first thing I learned is trying to stream in 4K is a nightmare. So the camera that I'm using, which is a Nikon Z30, that's new, overheats trying to transmit 4K. The bandwidth required to push 4K up to YouTube is astounding. I think it was over 20 megabits a second. Tuck says almost all the snow in the Buffalo area melted away with the warm weather. Bigger snow piles still hanging around. That's amazing. K-Bonk is seeking anyone having any experience with a handheld steam generator. I have no idea what that is. But somebody will pipe up and say they do. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, so we've got the Nikon Z30. We decided that 4K is right out. Did many experiments at 4K. They're on unlisted YouTube videos. It was too much. So we are now transmitting 1080p. Very nice quality. Cameras at 1080p. We're pushing 1080p out, and everything's working really well. Almost Machining. Oh, Almost is trying to help out with the steam generator. Henry says it was 16 degrees Celsius at New Year's Eve over here in Germany. 16 is pretty warm for New Year's Eve. Yeah, I think it's weird weather all over this time around. So to finish off the tech, we've got the Nikon Z30, we've got OBS running, and we're upstairs in the office. The other thing that has been a real win. Hey, Robert, Bob Labs is here. Happy New Year. Nice to see you. We're now running on a computer which can handle all the video. I mean, absolutely without breaking a sweat. And last time when we had Aaron on, we were running on a Mac Mini, and we crushed it. We destroyed the Mac Mini. So we're now on a computer. This is my engineering computer that I use for CAD work. And if this didn't handle it, we could use the engineering computer I use for simulation work. Somebody said to me yesterday, that'll handle 24 cameras. And it will. So we're good. Well, welcome aboard. So we have a surprise for you today. to make up for my hot steaming pile of streaming last time with Aaron, which it was great from an information standpoint, but from a video quality standpoint, it was horrible. So that's what led to this big push to get the tech figured out, and we have. So without further delaying the surprise, please welcome aboard Mr. Aaron Walla.
Happy Sunday, guys.
All the way from, what's your hometown?
I live in Minneapolis.
In Minneapolis.
And it's about 15 degrees here right now.
Well, 15. Which 15? We have to, we have international
15 degrees
views.
Fahrenheit.
Okay, very good. So it's a little colder.
On the chilly side.
A little on the chilly side, but nice to see you. So I brought you in early. We're going to talk a little bit about your follow-up on your grinder selection. I know Aaron is looking to buy another grinder for his home shop that he's building. I have some reports on the coolant heating project, so I think I'm going to give that report, and Aaron can comment on it. The guys in chat are like, "This, we're solving the problems of the world right here." Okay, with and that makes me very happy. By the way, I use I don't know what you're using for making steam. We use humidifiers in the bedrooms, and they're ultrasonic. And then we use distilled water in the ultrasonics, and they run forever. That's a little hint. And,
Do you run distilled water in your coolant tank?
Excellent question, sir. We run distilled water in the coolant tank. So I run only distilled water in our coolants. I got a question this week about using reverse osmosis water, RO water. And I agreed that that would be fine for coolant. The problem with RO water, and the reason I don't use it, is that it has a very low efficiency. So to make a gallon of RO water, you throw away as much as 2 gallons of water. So I didn't like that, especially being on a well. So we do not use RO water. I know Saunders Machine Works uses RO water. Grimsmo uses RO water. As long as you understand the efficiency of how much RO water you get for how much water you dump, fine. But for me, I would rather use distill and make distilled water. And I've got coolant that I've been running for a decade, and I haven't had any issues.
And you said you're making distilled water? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I held back. As you might imagine, I wanted to go, crazy. But I'll talk about deionized, Kevin, also. We literally have a 1-gallon still down in the basement. It's made by Mega Home, I think, which is a play on Mega Ohm of resistance and home. They're nice. They're stainless. They last a long time. We have burned up. We're on our 3rd one, I think, which is fine because they'll go like 3 years, and they're not expensive. So our rule in the house is if you go in the basement, check the still. So we save the blue, the blue water cooler containers.
Yeah, sure.
So our Taekwondo school went through those like crazy. So I have about a dozen of them. So we fill those up from the still. So now we're not doing production. This is the big thing, right? We're not in a production shop. So we make enough distilled water, 1 gallon at a time, to take care of all of our coolant needs. And that's worked out really well. But I'm a big fan of distilled water.
Yeah, that's something I've been meaning to look into because I plan to run it in my grinders at home. My previous grinder, my current grinder, isn't set up for coolant. So I was, envisioning buying it at least initially to get set up. But sounds like that's a better option.
Hang on, I got to do one tech thing here. You watch the chat while I fix our audio problem here. I started hearing a little feedback. This is live, folks.
So
There we go. That'll work. So there's a question in the chat. What is the benefit of distilled water for the coolant, from Henry? So the big benefit of the distilled water is no minerals. And what happens is if you put water in your tank, if you mix up coolant, right? You put coolant in your tank. You lose coolant one of 2 ways. One way is evaporation, and the other way is carryout. Carryout is when your parts are wet. You take them out. You're losing coolant that way, and there's nothing you can do about that except to be a little disciplined about dripping your parts off in the machine. But the second way you lose it is evaporation. And evaporation usually takes away water, but not the coolant. So your coolant concentration starts creeping up. Then you go and you pour water in. And by the way, these days, especially with, I'm using Qualichem, which I've talked about before. You can just dump more water in and bring your concentration back up. The problem is, when the water evaporates, if there were minerals in the water, those minerals stay. So over time, your mineral content goes up and up and up, and eventually it will kill your coolant. So if you use distilled water, there's no minerals. So it goes forever. That's the benefit.
Kill the pump too. We have a serious issue of hard water at my house, and it just leaves leaves a nasty film on it on everything, and it will build up and it'll wear stuff out. I mean, there's
And the hard water, the film that you see like white crusty stuff.
yep,
Yeah, that's minerals,
yeah,
and that will eventually a high mineral content will hurt the coolant.
yeah. And I figured, that stuff will get on everything. I mean, when you're running coolants on the grinder, it splashes. It could get on the ways or
Yep.
anything. I wouldn't be too worried about a little bit of coolant, but if those minerals build up, I'm sure it could be damaging to just about anything.
And I can report that it's an absolute non-issue with distilled water. It's a
Yeah.
joy.
And K-Bonk says that you can use dehumidifier water to accomplish the same thing.
So I'll say cautiously yes, and dehumidifier water theoretically is distilled water, right? You're distilling water out of the air. I mean, you're condensing water out of the air. There's two issues. One issue is if the metal of your dehumidifier is corroding, which unfortunately does happen, then that ends up in that water. The second issue is stuff that is lighter than water, like solvents that are in the air, even at a low concentration, they're going to end up in your distillation.
Wow.
So one of the ways that gets dealt with is with a carbon filter in series with your distilled water production. If you look at some of in fact, the one I have, the water gets condensed in the coil, and then it goes through a little thing where you're supposed to have a little carbon filter. So you're distilling the water, leaving behind the heavy stuff, right? But it could have light solvents in it. Then it goes through the carbon filter. The carbon filter grabs the organics. We're not worried about it because I'm running off a well, and frankly, if I get some organics in my coolant tank, I guess what I'm about to do. I'm about to put a bunch of organics in my coolant tank. So those are the things. But otherwise, yeah, you could use your dehumidifier water. I don't see why not. Almost says you condense dust out of the air as well, and that is also true. Not condense, but I know what you're saying.
Well, dust in a surface grinder is basically the baseline.
Right, exactly. Somebody asked the question. I'm trying to find it. Henry says, maybe our water here is really clean. I have none of those issues. It is very possible that, especially if you're on city water, that is not hard and is instead of being chlorinated, a lot of cities are using ozone to disinfect water. So if your water is not hard and it's ozonated, it could be glorious. So we test our water. I know exactly what's in the water. I'm sure you've tested your water at your house, Aaron, right? Not for a while. Yeah, it's not expensive to do. We found a really good water lab, and testing your water just tells you everything you need to know. If your water's hard, well, your water's hard because you're seeing the
Yeah.
stuff.
We have a water softener. That helps a little bit.
So let's talk a little bit about that. When I lived one town over, okay, we had a well. That's the house where I built my own shop. I really missed that shop. That was really nice.
Yeah.
But we had kids. It was a busy road, so it wasn't a good place for kids, but it was a great place for my shop. But we had to move. So that's when I got my first CNC machine, was in that shop. And I started getting some corrosion around the spindle. And of course, this was the Sharp VMC. And of course, now I'm going crazy because this is my brand new machine, and I see a little bit of spider corrosion, and I was using. Brian brings up a good point. He says it's super cheap by the gallon at the grocery store. It is, and you can, when I first filled my coolant tank for the Sharp, I went to the grocery store and I talked to the manager and I said, I'm going to need 40 gallons of distilled water. He said, we call that Wednesday. We'll see you Wednesday. I'm like, okay. I showed up on Wednesday and he had 40 gallons of distilled water for me, and it was not expensive. So that is a good source. But getting back to the story, I got started. I think I was using trim coolant. So yeah, it's Watergate. This is the Watergate episode. So Henry says our city water is not chlorinated, and I don't know if it gets an ozone treatment. Check it out, because I think the ozone treatment is brilliant. It takes care of a lot of problems. But anyway, I started waving my fist in the air, and I said, trim coolant, it's awful. Blah. So I switched to Hankstofers and S388, which was a corn oil derived coolant, no dyes, no fragrances. And it was a good coolant. But it started leaving sludge on the machine. And anyway, long story short, to solve the corrosion problem, I couldn't figure out why I was getting corrosion. So I had a softener put in. I'm like, oh, my water's hard, so I had a softener put in, and I'm getting more corrosion. So finally, I looked for a water nerd. In fact, that's exactly what I did. I went around, asked everybody I knew, do you know a water nerd? And I started making calls. So I'd call these labs, and I'd say, I'd like to talk to your water nerd. And they said, well, I think I used a little more, clearer language, but they say, oh, well, you just drop off your thing. We do your, I said, yeah. Do you do the testing in-house? Oh, you just drop off the... I said, do you do the testing in-house? No, we send it to this lab. Goodbye. Pick up the... Call again. Finally, I got this lab. This guy answers the phone. I said, look, I'm looking for a water expert. He said, how can I help you? Excuse me. And I said, I'm looking for a water nerd. He says, I'm a water nerd. I'm like, really? He says, yeah. He says, I'm the in-house chemist. I have a PhD in water chemistry. My name is, excuse me, my name is Nelson. And it was Nelson Labs. I'm like, where are you? He told me where he was, which was about 5 miles north of me. I said, can I come visit you? He said, yes. Boom! I headed up. Sure enough, this guy was, in fact, a water nerd. And he tested my water, and then we both stared at the results. I told him the whole story, all the gory details. And finally, literally after 45 minutes of talking and looking at the numbers, you could almost hear the light bulb go on in his head. He says, I think I got it. I said, what's that? He says, look down the list on the test. You see it says chlorides? And I said, yeah. And there was, I don't remember the number. Let's just say it was 50 parts per million or 100 parts per million of chlorides. I said, yeah, is that a problem? He says, it passes the water quality test. But that little bit of chlorides combined with your slightly acidic water, also totally within the parameters, he says, I think that's your corrosion. And I'm like, where's the chloride coming from? And he says, we are seeing this in wells all over the state that are near highways that treat with salt.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, oh. So, earlier somebody said, why do you use distilled water? You're starting to see how I arrived at distilled water?
Yeah, but didn't you say that when you first set up the machine, you used only distilled water?
Not when I first set up the machine.
Okay.
This was before I got smart. This is how I arrived at distilled water. So I told, the act of softening the water made it worse. I don't remember all the water chemistry, but it wasn't the salt. It was the act of softening the water. Like I said, this guy was a PhD. I cannot recall to you everything he said.
Yeah.
So, but that was my eye-opening experience with water quality, right? So finally, I dumped the coolant. I don't exactly remember when I started using, when I dumped all the non-distilled water. But, oh yes I do. That's when I changed coolants, is when I dumped the old coolant and I started with the new coolant with distilled water. All the problems went away.
That's pretty good.
But the Hankstafers had a different problem, and that was it was leaving this brown sludge on stuff, and it was impossible to clean. I later learned that was the all-natural corn oil that was oxidizing, and it was really hard. So then I fired Hankstafers for good cause, and we had to clean the machines with isopropyl alcohol. The only thing that cut the brown sludge was isopropyl alcohol. And then eventually we switched to the Qualichem XC250, and that has been perfect. That plus distilled water. Now, one of the things that I always got a kick out of was the super fancy coolant, the clear stuff. What is that called? The stuff from Switzerland.
I don't know. What we use at work is clear, at least on the grinders.
Yeah, the stuff that Titans of CNC with a Blazer 735. It's clear. Yeah, boom. Right. Whatever. It's clear. Yes, Henry says he needs to get a skimmer. That's another topic. I'm not going to get into skimmers. But if you notice, when you use the Blazer coolant, they require you to use distilled water. And I look at that and I'm going, yeah, most of this is the distilled water. So
yeah.
That's my distilled water story. So if I haven't sold everybody on distilled water, I'm not doing my job here.
We had an issue like that at work where we don't use distilled water on anything, and we got these new many axis lathes, and they were threading some parts, and the root of the threads was getting this white film, and just the same kind of thing, it took a long time to solve that mystery, and they ended up being able to change the ratio and get that solved. But it's something that you could only even see under magnification, so it's not something you would normally look at. But the customer
once you start using distilled water, and Kevin asks, deionized? No, it's not. There's no special deionization process in the stuff that I use. So we have not addressed deionized at all. And I know that you asked that twice. I'm sorry, Kevin, that I didn't answer that. And I have some history in biolab chemistry, and I understand deionization. But no, just distilled, cheap and dirty. So there you go. The final point I was going to put on it was, if you start with distilled water, it's like a clean baseline. There's no questions, there's no mysteries, there's no nothing. If I use distilled water, and Henry uses distilled water, and K-Bonk uses distilled water, and Aaron uses distilled water, everybody's using the same thing. So I think that's most of this is a bold statement. I'll make it anyway. bold, sweeping, unjustified statement. I think 90% of the issues we hear about with coolants is the water. How's that? Oh, here's another pet peeve. You know how you hear, oh, you should mix the first batch. You could use distilled water for makeup, but you should mix the first batch with tap water because it needs the minerals. Okay. That's complete bullshit. Okay. What it is the coolant manufacturer says, okay, these guys are going to use tap water, so we're going to add chemicals to compensate for the crap in the tap water. Okay, and that's why you have to use tap water, because they're already compensating. Okay, so the whole tap water thing is like out the window. I don't believe it.
So maybe it makes sense to use something that was designed to be used with distilled water.
Well, I know that the Blaser is, and then experientially, I could tell you that the Qualichem has just been bulletproof, like from day one. The Qualichem has never seen tap water, and it's been I've been living here 12 years. I filled that coolant tank once, so I have an existence proof. And that coolant is just going and going and going.
You still had to top it off, though, right?
Yeah. I top it off with distilled water. I add coolant as necessary. Oh, the other thing that I don't do anymore is I don't like make a bucket, mix the coolant, then dump it into the... It's like, what am I putting in the machine today? Am I putting water in or am I putting coolant in? And I put it in, and that's it. And I let the system run, and that's been no problem. I think in the old days, I think maybe older coolants were very sensitive to how you mix them, and you had the oil in last rule. OIL spells oil, right? Oil in last. And I totally ignore that, and it's been fine. Henry says, I think deionized water is a bad idea. I know that deionized water will pull ions from other materials. I don't have any experience in that, but...
He said it with confidence.
Yeah, he did say it with confidence. I think that he gets points.
Yeah.
I would say that the fact that I've completely ignored that and have not been bitten by it, I'm not sure it's important, but we'll see. Yeah, Brian says I let the pump do the mixing too. Exactly.
Yeah, so do I.
It's funny, while the grinder's running, when I'm making PFG stones, I look at the side of the tank. There's a little sight glass, and I'll go and I'll dump in 4 gallons of water while it's running, and it all gets mixed up and it's fine. So there you go.
One issue that I've had.
Sorry, go ahead.
One issue I've had with coolants is that at work, our grinders only have, for the most part, 10-gallon coolant tanks. And the grinders aren't assigned to any particular person. We all have ones that we like. But when you come to a grinder, you don't necessarily know how full the coolant tank is. Now, if you have to do really fussy work, you don't want to have to add water in the middle of your process, because the water we use is coming from, just a tap. And it's colder than the coolant that sits just in the ambient air temperature.
Yep.
And so if you just add a couple of gallons, 4 or 5 gallons of cold tap water to the opening of the coolant tank, and you don't mix it, that thing's gonna shock your part small.
Yeah.
You might mark up your part with Sharpie and go to do a finish pass, and it doesn't even touch it.
Yeah. Which is a very good segue. And I will point out to everybody that I did not pay you to say that, but this brings up the coolant temperature project.
Sure.
Because Kevin, who also is playing right into your hand here, Kevin says, has raising the temperature on your coolant increased evaporation rate? Funny, we should talk about this. So, when we last met our coolant tank, I had put a piece of insulation under it. I wrapped it with the silvered bubble wrap insulation. And then I added a couple of heaters. Now, let me just, I have some show and tell here. This is one of the heaters, okay? This is a 200 watt magnet heater. So this is meant to go like on the oil pan of a snowmobile or whatever to heat it. It's got these magnets on it, right? So I took two of these and I started with one of them, and I observed that it was like a candle in a hurricane. So then I bought a second one. So then I had two of them. Now we're up to, this is 200 watts. We're up to two of them on either side of the tank. And that's 400 watts. So I've been living with 400 watts on the tank, and I've left it on. This has been like 3 weeks in cold temperatures.
And can you adjust the temperature on those at all?
So this is not a controller. It's just a heater. Then there's a separate controller, which is obviously downstairs, made by a company called Inkbird. It's a Chinese-sourced, inexpensive controller. I will put all these links in. I think I've put them in previous videos, but I'll put them in the information for this video when I post it to YouTube. And so I've had this 400 watts of heating power by magnets right on the side of the coolant tank, and this controller is set to 68F for 3 weeks, and I can tell you that it has never reached 68F. When I did a big batch of stones on Friday, it got up to 62, 63, with the machine running. Never saw 68 degrees. So basically, I had these two 200 watt heaters running full time for 3 weeks. My wife said to me today, "Did you see the electric bill?" And I said, "Why?" She says, "It jumped up." Now, we make solar electric, right? We have panels on the roof, so it could have been worse. So that told me I'm doing it wrong, okay? Henry says a customer of ours has machines that are made of stainless steel, and there is deionized water running over them all the time. After a few years, you can barely drill a hole in the stainless or bend it. Oh my God, you invented a hardening process.
Only takes a couple of years.
Yeah. So I learned a couple of things from my experiments. One is that 400 watts of heat on 30 gallons of coolant is pissing into the wind. Did not help.
What made you try to heat up the coolant tank versus the water itself?
Well, it's a recirculating system, right? You have your coolant tank, and if it's cold, it's going to stay cold until the machine warms it up. But you get that shock, right? You get you get 50 degree coolant blasting on your machine. Yeah. Now, I put two thermocouples on the machine, one on the base, one on the column, okay, on the surface of the column, surface of the base. When I turn the heat on in the shop, that machine warms up pretty well. I see the grinder itself comes up to temperature pretty reasonably quickly. Not crazy quick. But the coolant doesn't. The 30 gallons of coolant just doesn't move. So I decided to go with more watts. And this is probably what Adam Demuth was talking about. This is an aquarium heater that submerges in the coolant. Okay, this attaches to the outside of the tank, and I think the efficiency of the magnet heater is just not very good. In fact, when it was on the side of the tank, you could put your finger on top of this surface here, right, and it was hot. Well, if this was hot, that was heat that wasn't going out this face. So the efficiency of these is low. So this is a submerged heater. You can see there's got suction cups that allows it to be suction cupped to the glass of an aquarium. This is meant to be submerged, and this is 800 watts. I actually had to look around for one that was not 1500 watts. There's a lot of 1500 watt heaters. So this one is 800 watts. This one will be submerged, which means the efficiency of this thing heating up the coolant should be much higher. So I got two things going for me: double the power and higher efficiency. Now, also in my plan is I'm not leaving them on all the time. So what I'm hoping is, if I don't grind all week and then I show up at the grinder on Friday, maybe Thursday night or early Friday morning, I turn the heating system on, and the 800 watts with higher efficiency now has enough poop to push the temperature of the coolant up, and it will go to 68 degrees and stop, and that's where the room thermostat is set to. So here's to hoping that experiment is coming.
And so, which side of the coolant tank are you putting that on?
It will be the only one that's convenient, which is the back side of the tank has a little hatch, so it's going to get shoved in the little hatch. And yes, Brian, it will be submerged in coolant. Don't panic. K-Bonk says, where is the return on on your tank? So the return is closer to the front of the tank. Okay, it dumps it through the filter paper, the continuous filter paper. So that's in about 1/3 of the way into the tank, and where I'm going to put the heater is about 7/8 of the way to the back of the tank. So the flow would be going over the heater and into the pump.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens. All I want to see is the ability of this thing to heat it up enough to hit the magic control point of 68 degrees.
Yeah, I'm glad you're doing all this testing before
before you have to spend money. Well, you know because you're doing it professionally, but we don't think about this stuff in milling. But as soon as you're talking tenths, you start looking at temperatures, and boy, it's like, not only is this stuff pasta, as Robin says, right?
Yeah.
No, I say pasta. He says rubber. Not only is it rubber and pasta, but it's cold or hot and growing and shrinking, and yeah. So I'm trying to get a little bit of a control on it.
Yeah, that drives me crazy at work sometimes, because a lot of times I'll have a lot of parts to grind, and a very common tolerance in mold making is plus nothing minus 2/10. So any shutoffs have to be within that tolerance.
Wow.
And you can spend all day grinding parts and they'll all come in, 1 2/10 under.
Right.
And then you come in the next day and you check them again. And now you're like plus 1/10.
Yep.
So it's something that, I kind of have learned to use Kentucky windage to figure out.
Yeah, exactly.
I kind of have a better feel for it after years of doing it, but it's a real issue. Like, getting the coolant to the right temperature could make a big difference.
And I published this a few weeks ago. The heat capacity of water is 10 times the heat capacity of cast iron. So what that means is, if we take a volume of water and the same volume of cast iron, it takes 10 times less energy to raise the temperature of the cast iron than it does to raise the temperature of the water.
Well, that's not great for us.
So if you're doing your grinding and you're, like you already pointed out, and you're blasting 50-degree coolant on your part, which has been sitting on the bench, right? It's been so now that your part is made of steel, it's sitting on the bench. Your shop is obviously perfectly temperature controlled to 68 or 20C for Henry. Uh, and then you start blasting your cold stuff on it, and it shrinks, and you grind, and now you're done grinding, and it grows. Yeah. So Brian is concerned. Brian has a concern. I think we should address Brian's concern. He is concerned about coolant attacking the heater material. So I could taste this and figure out what kind of plastic it is. So this plastic I could probably get rid of. Believe it or not, and I'm not making this up. You're going to think I'm making this up. This is, what does that say right there?
800-watt titanium heater.
Titanium. So the answer is it's titanium. It says corrosion resistant, extended. So this is meant for saltwater tanks. So it's actually a pretty nice unit. It was not terribly expensive. I'll put the information.
And they probably only covered it in plastic because of fish, not wanting fish kiss the
and the plastic. Let's see if I can show you this here again. All right. You can unsnap it. There it is.
Yeah. Okay. So you can just pop it right off.
So I could pop that right off. It is actually. It's pretty nice. I'm not gonna lie. It's made in China, but I'm pretty happy with it. So we'll see what happens. And what's the worst that happens is I pop a GFI breaker, and I learned my lesson. But I'm not too concerned about it. So I'm excited to see what that does. We'll see what happens.
GFCI circuit on your coolant tank?
That's a good question. I might, because it's in a garage and code says outlets in a garage have to be GFCI.
Okay. It's different here. It's just only near windows, I think, or sinks.
Yeah, I don't remember, but
at least it better be, because I just put in like 70 non-GFCI outlets.
well, we have GFCI breakers.
Yeah.
And those, they're expensive, but you're not putting in 10 of them. So I don't know. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Almost Machining says, it is a light bulb. You are correct, sir. It is a very weak light bulb. A 800 watt light bulb. Water is a great thermal bank, says K-Bonk. Yeah, it's amazing. But I looked it up. I had to figure out why, and the answer is 10x. It's 10 times a better thermal bank than steel. So, anyway, I'm approaching nirvana, where the coolant's 68 degrees, the machine is 68 degrees, the operator's 68 degrees, the drink is 68 degrees. We'll get there. Of course, your body is not 68 degrees. So when you touch your parts.
Now, I know you do a lot of metal grinding as well, but how much does temperature affect the stones or the result?
That's a really good question. I don't know. The stones are mostly aluminum oxide. So, I did look it up. I don't remember the numbers, but there's two numbers of interest. One is what we were talking about, which is heat capacity. Mm-hmm. I did not look that up. I looked up thermal coefficient of expansion, and aluminum oxide was kind of right in there with our metals. It wasn't terribly different.
Okay.
But I'll take that as homework.
Yeah. No, I'm just curious.
Yeah. And also remember, I'm not grinding to dimension. I'm grinding to flat.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit less of a
but grinding stuff flat is also, one of the hard things to do when you've got temperature variation.
Yep. That's why I encourage people to use coolant at the very least, it uniforms the material, right? If you have lots of flood coolant,
Yeah.
it's at least getting it thermally uniform. Whereas if you have no coolant, your edges are going to get different temperature than the middle of your part. Almost asks, you two don't use a mist coolant, do you? I started with mist coolant. Have you used mist coolant?
No, I've not used it. I guess I have used it. I picked up one of those. I think it's a Noga product, like
A
a
mini
Cool
cool,
Mist
yeah,
or something. And I tried to use it on the mill, and it was just such a mess.
yeah.
It's in a big industrial space, but we're in a tiny shop in your basement. It's just
I
it wasn't ideal.
I like them. I think yeah, it makes a little mess, but it's nothing like it's not, you're not using gallons. You're using a cup of stuff. So it's going to dribble somewhere. You got to clean it up. But from a thermal point of view, it does a pretty good job. And adding a mist of water in the airstream. Now I understand, because water has all this heat capacity. So my first year and a half of making stones was all with a mist coolant. And that, talk about a mess.
Yeah, that's got to be pretty rough with just
That was a mess. And now with the flood coolant and 2 stages of filtering, it really is a joy, because there's a lot of sludge that gets cleaned out of there, and I don't have to do it. The machine's doing it.
Yeah.
Almost says mist is so much cooler than flood, and I don't think he means from a sociological point of view. Tucker says Santa brought me a Noga Mini Cool for Christmas, putting it on your grinder. Once the garage isn't an ice cube. And in Buffalo, New York, we call that August. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Mini Cool. I think it was nice. But yeah, it is a little messy, so you have to provide for that. The other thing I like about it is you could dial it in to be mostly air, or very wet, or somewhere in between.
Another thing to keep in mind, heat-wise, just since we're on the subject, is if you have an electromagnetic chuck, that will heat up the longer it's on. And one thing I learned this year is that it does not heat up in any sort of uniform way. And so one issue I found is, if you have coolant running on the chuck, it will keep the chuck pretty cool, other than what's ever underneath the part. So sometimes very often I'll have like a new bolt spinner on there, or a sign chuck.
Yep.
And whatever space that metal is covering is not going to be cooled down by the coolant. So I've taken stuff off and felt the chuck where there were parts, where there weren't, and noticed the difference. You would think that the temperature of the sign chuck, or the spinner would keep the temperature down, but it actually moves. And I noticed grinding a lot of stuff all day, that spinner will grow from the chuck.
Wow. So there's no way around it. You still have to be on top of things.
Yeah.
And Kentucky windaging it. So Henry says my mag chuck is water cooled. I thought that would be standard on every electronic mag chuck. No, it is not.
Who's the manufacturer?
Yeah, who's the manufacturer, Henry? And then we're getting asked about grinder shopping. So we should probably finally get to the original intent here.
Yeah.
So why don't you start filling us in on your thought process on grinder shopping?
Okay. Now, that might rehash some of the stuff that we talked about the other day.
That's
That's
okay.
okay. So I'm looking for a grinder now, primarily a tool room grinder, and I plan to kind of trick it out to my own purposes. In fact, I put in a call to a special someone to see if he'd be interested in helping me put together a grinder, and we'll see how that goes. But if it happens, you guys will be excited to watch the process, I'm sure. Um, so I think it's probably going to be a Mitsui or a Parker Majestic grinder. I want a 6x18, although I might not put an 18-inch chuck on it. A 12-inch chuck will accomplish everything I need work-wise, and I would love to just have a little bit more space to measure parts while they're still on the grinder, especially spinner work. I'd like to be able to move the spinner further away from the wheel to get my hands in there to measure because it's always a nuisance. So I would mount the chuck probably as far to the right as I could get away with. What else? I'm definitely going to run coolants on it, but most tool room grinders either don't run coolants or they'll have like a small 10-gallon coolant tank. And I'd like something bigger just to, it'll take more to bring it up to temp, but I think it'll be more stable. Um, what else am I looking for? Lots of Z height because oftentimes when you're grinding just weird oddball stuff, you end up with a lot of setup blocks under the spindle. And if you're grinding like a 12-inch pin or something like that, and you're putting an angle on the head, that requires a lot of Z height. Um, the the reason why I'm buying a new grinder because I do have a Herrig 612 that's in really just about perfect condition. It grinds great, but I intend to kind of put a lot of money into this grinder, a lot of effort, and there are certain things that I think will be just kind of a nuisance on the Herrig or that the Herrig doesn't have. For example, I don't like the table locking mechanism on the Herrig. Um,
Oh yeah,
Also,
I remember that.
yeah,
There's a knob on the right side, and I remember there was an issue with tightening it would actually either
move it.
raise the table or push the table. I don't remember which way it went.
Yeah. So the other, it also has like a tapered column, which means if you're setting up a DRO, you have to, you know, jump through your ass to figure out a solution. And now millions of people have put, DROs on Harrods. It's a super common grinder in the United States. So,
Yeah.
it's not a huge deal, but if I'm going to put a lot of money into something and it's going to be my daily driver, it's not going to be that machine. Um, so I really like the Mitsubi's. I use them at work. The table lock's really nice, and the way the stops move, you've got a little bit of adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're getting it close to the tangent point when you're doing round grinding on there, you can kind of finesse it into position. What else? So I'm looking for something that's either very new or rebuilt. I've even considered getting a new grinder, but ultimately I want to have two grinders set up. One that's more basic for squaring up blocks, something I can set up and walk away from, so some sort of automatic grinder, and then a tool room grinder. Now, someday I'd like to have a full-on CNC Parker Majestic, like the one that Adam the Machinist has. But those are really pricey, and I have to have the work to justify it before I take that plunge. So there's a chance that I can figure out how to either add CNC to an existing grinder, or um, there are some automatic options that would be good. But for right now, I'm looking for the tool room grinder. So, um, you know, one of the big things I do is grinding core pins, and
Yep.
a lot of times you have to grind features onto those. And
So you mentioned finding a grinder and then CNCing it, like retrofitting it.
mhm.
I have an opinion about that. And I know at least one of the thoughts that are floating in your head, and I'm not going to touch on our mutual friend. But you know, I thought about that, and I think, if you're going to be a machinist, a tool maker, a producer of stuff, to take a complete detour and then start to mess around with CNC controls and motors and stepper motors and stuff, I think that's a mistake. I think you should write the check. And I'm a nerd, man.
Yeah.
I'm the first guy that wants to dive into that crap. So I'm a little cold on, if you'll pardon the thermal pun. I'm a little cold on CNCing something yourself, unless it's something you do every day. And if it's something you do every day, that's probably how you're making your money. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean,
So if I convert something to CNC, obviously I'm not going to do it myself, but if I go that route, what I had in mind is something that won't affect the operation of the tool room grinder. I'll still be able to run it manually the way I want. I won't be able to do really fancy things like, you know, come to the tangent point of a spinner, grind something and,
yep,
you know, dress dress fancy angles. And but what I could do is just create a situation where on simpler stuff I can walk away from it.
yeah,
Uh, so it'd be kind of like an automatic grinder with a little bit more, you know, some more variable control in it. But I do understand that
yeah.
that's
And of course, I would advocate for the only because I own one for the
yeah.
Okamoto. Um, don't forget, Tuck says time is money. May be more cost effective for you to pay for the CNC machine so you can immediately start paying it back. Just my 2 cents. It's 4 cents now, buddy. Inflation. Just make sure your time is spent costed into CNC converter. I think we're all agreeing. All right, Kevin. Take care. Yeah, we hit the top of the hour here.
See you later, man.
Well, thanks for the update, brother. I think I'm very excited for you. And of course, anything I can do to help, let me know. And I'm sure if you're in need of opinions, our our viewers have some.
Yeah,
Brian
and
Brian
I
agrees
actually,
with Tuck. Sorry, go ahead.
maybe if I had a little time to run an Okamoto CNC grinder, maybe I would change my mind.
Yeah.
I I've never had a chance to do that, and
Well, if you find some time and you come out east, not only will you get your hands on an Okamoto ACC 818NC, I have a room that you can stay in. So,
well, that is very generous, and I think I'll take you up on that.
okay. Well, and there's several restaurants that need to have our business. Road trip, it says almost absolutely. We like road trips.
Yeah, I want to see how it works with with spinner work, and there are certain things that I'm not sure if it'll work for me or not, just
Yeah.
because I don't know if the table positioning is
Hmm.
super accurate.
Yeah, I've only done a little bit of spinner work, uh, and you never have enough room for spinners. That's just the way it is. You need a 20 by 30 grinder so that you could fit all that crap in there. But yeah, it's a matter of seeing what the machine does. But the offer stands. I like the Okamoto guys. I like Okamoto is based out of Chicago, and when you call up, you get a real person and you get real, good information. I like that. So yeah, we could talk about that offline. But
Yeah,
it's just like buying a car. You have to go
yeah,
test drive it
yeah, for sure.
and see what
But
it's like.
they're big, like that 818. That's a big grinder. I saw one at a trade show.
Well, hang on,
It
because
had a
there's
full enclosure, but
was it an SA1 or an ACC one. I think you saw an SA one.
Okay.
That's what Grimsmo has. So mine is not much bigger than my Brown and Sharp was.
Okay.
It really isn't. In fact, the error, I made one mistake when I did the layout in the shop, and I said, okay, this is how things are going to fit, blah, blah, blah. Well, the control, the mount for the control sticks out, and it's a hard mount to the electronics case.
There's no moving it.
Well, you could rotate it, but you can't like completely swing it out of the way. That was a mistake. I didn't know that. So it's not a huge deal, but it kind of killed some of the dynamics in my welding area, because the idea was when I'm not using that, I can get it out of the way. It doesn't work that way. No, but I think a real smart guy could redesign the mount.
Yeah,
and it's just it's like the old story of the hound dog on the farmer's porch, howling and howling and howling, and finally a passerby comes over to the farmer and says, "I hear your dog howling. What's going on?" And the farmer on his rocking chair says, "Oh yeah, he's laying on a nail." And the dog's howling. He says, "Well, why doesn't the dog move?" He says, "It doesn't hurt that much."
Yeah.
So it doesn't hurt that much yet. That's the problem. Anyway, so my offer stands if you want to come out and play with the Okamoto, and I can introduce you to the Okamoto people. And hashtag not sponsored. So there you go. Well, we better wrap it up because we did it. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining, and I hope everybody enjoyed the discussion, and I hope everybody enjoyed the quality of the technology here today, because I think it's a lot nicer than it was last time. And we'll be doing more of this and maybe get some more guests in. So with that, go ahead.
Next week I have a surprise for you. Next time. I just picked up something the other day that's pretty exciting, but
okay.
Waited too long.
We'll leave it as a surprise, and that could work. All right, guys. Have a great Sunday. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for everybody who came to support us, and we'll see you guys next week on the PFG Live.
We'll see you guys next week.